You just made such a great point that I think it's important for us to cover. Storage and limitations around storage actually have almost nothing to do with the limitation of the hard drives or the configuration or array that they're set up in. It's kind of limited by your budget, right? So if you were to come to us and say that you wanted a year's worth of 24/7 4K footage, the answer is simply yes, as long as you can afford it. Hey everyone, hope you're doing well today. Welcome to another episode of the In the Trenches Roundtable. I'm back. No, I'm just kidding. It's been a while though since I've hosted the In the Trenches Roundtable, so excited to be here. Excited to be chatting through a solution-focused episode with James. James is one of our experts on the call today.
Yeah, good to be
Cool.
here. Excited about this topic.
Definitely. It's one that's been coming up more frequently, so I'm definitely excited to dive into it. So today we're going to be talking about storage and specifically storing footage for long periods of time. And so why is that important? It's important because we deal with a lot of clientele who have industry regulations where they may require them, uh, the client in a certain industry to have a certain amount of days of footage on hand. And so we're going to kind of explore, okay, if you're in an industry that has that requirement, or maybe you just want to have that for yourselves, um, how we can kind of achieve that in a multitude of different ways. Does that sound fair, James? Yeah.
Great. Yeah, yeah, it's a great setup. And yeah, there's people, obviously regulations are one of the first thing people go to, but there are a lot of more and more businesses want to retain more and more footage. What used to be a standard 2 weeks for some companies is now going into 30 days and 60 days and so on. So that's kind of the scenario we're going to be looking at.
Definitely. I mean, make a good point about companies in like the private sector too, right? Yeah. A lot of insurance companies recommend certain amount of days of footage and stuff, right? So if you're dealing with one of those situations, you're an industry that's regulated, you want to create a standard for yourselves, your insurance company is telling you something, we're going to be talking about how we can actually achieve those things. And so first, we're going to just kind of set an example to kind of, before we can talk about lengthy amounts of storage, like how do we even calculate storage in the first place? And so we're going to run through a quick example. So we've got a client who's got 26, quantity 26, 4K, so that's 8 megapixel cameras. They need 365 days of 24/7 retention. James, how would we go about like calculating something like that?
So that's a great question. So what footage is being how long you have when it comes to like how far you can go. So we talk about retention. What we're talking about is how far you can go back and see footage on hand. So that could be 1 week, it could be 1 day, it could be 1 year. It really just depends on like how much. Number one, there's three factors really, I guess. There's how much storage you have within your NVR. So number one, how big your hard drives are and how many you have. Number two is like the video bit rate and like how much storage it's actually taking up per second. Well, gets very technical on that, so we'll glean past that a little bit. But number three is like the resolution, and basically that kind of ties in with number two. But how high quality your video is, how many frames per second there is, all this kind of stuff. But to put it more simply, we do have a calculator, and so you can spit these numbers in here, and it's going to do the math for you, and it's going to say, hey, this is going to require about 415 terabytes of storage, and that's a ton of storage. So really the simple question, the simple answer I should say is how much you can throw it in the calculator, it'll tell you how much you need. And the more complicated one is based on a bunch of different factors. So
Bunch of different factors. I mean, even down to like how you have the camera set up to record,
yeah,
right? And I think like in the most layman's terms, the number of cameras, the resolution they're at, the frame rate they're recording at, I think are some of the bigger factors.
yep,
Um, but you said it was 400 and some change,
yep,
415
415.
terabytes. Yeah. Yeah. So for somebody who may not know, that's quite, a large amount of storage,
Yeah.
a single terabyte is a lot. In some cases in regular computing worlds, right? Maybe
Yeah,
not so much nowadays.
yeah, our phones have what most phones have less than 512, half a terabyte. So
Right.
kind of goes
Right.
to tell
That's
you
a
how
good
much
point.
that's looking
Yeah.
at. So, and our
Yeah.
biggest single drive that SCW sells is 12 terabytes as well. So that's kind of another way to tell that 415, you're going to need quite a few of those physical hard drives in your system. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to talk about a couple solutions. We're going to talk really about six solutions to, help us achieve getting 415 terabytes worth of space. And so first, what we're going to be talking about is more storage. And kind of sounds a little silly, but we're going to break it down for you and make it make sense. That's for sure. So, James, do you want to kick this one off? When we talk about a solution to help us get 415 terabytes worth of storage, and we say more storage, what do we mean?
yes, I mean that's a great question. It depends on what stage you're at. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you're building the system from the ground up, you want to build it up to have as much storage as you can and that really fits your budget. I mean, because that's the big thing with this one is that it's got to fit within your budget, right? But when you come with us and you say, I have these 26 cameras, I need them to be 4K, and I need them to be recording 24/7, that's going to be 415 terabytes. We have to look at the system that we're going to have to deliver there. So we're going to look first at what MBRs we can deliver.
To just jump in, James, don't mean to cut you off there. To jump in though, I want to just nip that common misconception in the butt. You just made such a great point that I think it's important for us to cover. Storage and limitations around storage actually have almost nothing to do with the limitation of the hard drives or the configuration or array that they're set up in. It's kind of limited by your budget, right? So
Yeah,
if you were to come to us and say that you wanted a year's worth of 24/7 4K footage, the answer is simply yes, as long as you can afford it.
yeah,
And that pretty much goes for any time period, right? And so I kind of want to just nip that common misconception. A lot of the times we hear from clients, there's a lot of consumer brands out there that sell this way. Um, but the storage and the capacity to store footage is entirely based on your budget and what you're after.
yeah. That's an excellent way of saying. That's kind of how I always phrase it. Whatever storage, whatever amount of footage that you need, we can deliver that. It's just a matter, can your budget pay for it? And to give you an example, so probably in that situation where you think, okay, I have 27 cameras, I need a 32 channel NVR. Probably not actually. You're going to have to jump up to a larger NVR that has more capacity. That's going to have an additional cost with it. Like for example, our Imperial 6416S that has 16 hard drive slots. And we mentioned earlier that 12 is the largest single drive. So if we do the math, we do 16 times 12, which would be the terabytes. 16 is the slots that this one has. That gets us to 192 terabytes. And so that's only about half of the way there, right? Um, this is where some of our you get into like the really nitty gritty of some of our higher end tech that we have. So on the back of this NVR, this is one of our enterprise grade NVRs. We actually had an episode on this where we talked about the dual power supply, all this kind of stuff that it offers. But on the back of it, there's two slots. They're called storage expanders on the back of it. You plug in what we call our mini SAS expanders, and that's going to give you an additional 16 bays per unit. So now if we add another one of those, it's going to be the same 192 terabytes, and that's going to get you 384. So you can add a second one, get you another 192 terabytes to bring the system up to 576 terabytes. So we're able to deliver beyond what it actually needs, so you can have some extra space or even get into RAID because that's going to take up some of your usable space. Well, again, we have a video on that too if you're interested. That just allows you to not lose footage in the event that the hard drive gets lost, which is usually very important for clients like this that need that regulatory requirement. You just need that space. But yeah, so we would be looking at two expanders and one of the larger NVRs to deliver something like this. So yeah, it's a lot of storage, but it's not something that we're unfamiliar with. We deal with this, I would say definitely on a weekly basis, something like this.
Very frequently, yeah. And just to like tie that up, right? For that example that we used at the beginning, 26 4K cameras, 365 days of footage, 24/7 retention, right? When we say more storage, what we mean is only 26 cameras, but recommending a 64 channel recording device because of its hard drive internal capacity and its ability to connect to external hard drive bays, right? So that's what we mean by like specing out more storage, get the pieces of equipment that can actually hold more hard drives to get you the amount of storage you're looking for. Um, and then James, you mentioned something there that's important. And don't forget about it, RAID, right?
Yeah. Yep, definitely something you want to consider while you're doing this, which is going to take away some of that, extra space that you got in terms of, where you're going to be putting these hard drives and everything like that. But it is going to save you in the event that if a hard drive fails, you're not going to lose any footage. So that's something that you can definitely give us a chat about. This is where things get pretty complicated, and if you have that need, we're there to walk you through and figure out the best solution for you for sure. So, but RAID should definitely be part of that package.
Absolutely. And if you're curious about like what RAID stands for or what it is, the different types of RAID that our systems offer or don't offer, we're not going to go into detail here in it. There's a link to a description down below where we have a whole video that covers RAID in depth. All right, so James, let's button up the more storage kind of solution. What are some like quick one-liner pros and what are some quick cons?
The pros are you're building the system to what you need, right? The next things that we cover, we have six different total solutions here, actually. The next ones we cover are sort of like, I wouldn't say sacrifices. I know I'm going way over one line, aren't I? But these aren't quite some of them are sacrifices, some of them quite aren't. They're setting changes, blah, blah, blah. But this is building exactly what you need. And the cons of that are that, we're going to be looking at a lot of hard drive costs that, 16 or that's, three 16 channel ones. So we're looking at, what was it, three? So it's 48 individual hard drives potentially in this situation, which could be looking at 20, $30,000 in hard drive cost here. But that is a one-time fee. This isn't something you're gonna have to pay monthly or annually or anything like that. Once you own those hard drives are gonna be good for years to come. So it is an additional cost to build this up to where, you're kind of making no sacrifices, but it is you know, I would say that the solution you want to start out with for sure.
Definitely. So that kind of segues into our additional solutions that we're going to be talking about here today, right? So the first one was more storage. Like ideally, if your budget is, doesn't have constraints, then let's just spec the hardware and components that we need to be able to achieve the storage we want, right?
Yep.
The next solution sets that we're going to be talking about will be, like you said, not necessarily like sacrifices might be for a lack of a better term, but um, things that we might be doing to the system to help achieve with maybe some constraints that we have. So the
Yeah,
first will really be though
adjustment might be a good word. It's like these are adjustments that you're gonna have to make to the system or
adjustments.
your
There it
expectations.
is.
Yeah, that's a nicer word for it.
Yeah, much nicer. Exactly. Exactly. Um, Consolidations, right?
Yep.
So solution two, motion or VCA recording. So remember in the initial example that we introduced, they were after 24/7 recording. And now in this example, let's just say it's not a regulatory requirement, right? Maybe that's what they were kind of just wanting or after originally. A solution could be changing over to motion or VCA recording. Is that what I'm gathering, James? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So our NVR support to either record based on whether it detects motion or not, or also some of our VCA options. And VCA is the more analytical stuff where it detects either a person or a vehicle within there. So it gives you even greater accuracy. And the main point when we talk about this is the storage savings, really. So obviously, if you're in a building and nobody's in that building from for a 12-hour period overnight, right? No, you're not a 24/7 facility. You close down after hours and you have 20 cameras that are recording basically nothing when nothing's happening. You're kind
Mm,
of in a way wasting that space, you could say. And so what motion recording really allows it to do is while nothing's happening after hours, just simply not record and save you that space. So when you look at our calculator, you'll see like the difference that takes, and you can adjust like how much motion you get through the calculator. And to put it really simply and to get to the point, like you could save as much as 50%. So that 415 terabytes we just talked about for 24/7 could be as low as, 200 or so, 250 terabytes with motion, which is a much more, you're cutting down one of those connectors that we mentioned earlier. So, you're going to save potentially a lot of money with that.
yeah, definitely. And you glossed over something there that I just want to touch on really quickly. When people hear motion in our space, they often think of the camera detects motion and it simply records. But you also, and that is true, but you also mentioned schedule that,
Yeah.
if you have operating hours, right, your school, let's say, and you've got kids in school from what, sometime to another time, 8 a.m. to
Yep.
5 p.m., right? And then there's nobody there after school, right? You can actually set the cameras to record based on a schedule, right? It can record different things based on a schedule.
Yeah, yeah, great point. So, this is when we get into our systems, it can get very granular. So you can start to really tweak anything you want on that. So, for example, you could set those cameras to record 24/7 during school hours, but then after school hours, only record on motion. Because there are some people who want that constant footage during the course of a day, or it's just going to be busy anyway. So why not record 24/7? But yeah, so you can set that on a per camera basis, on a per day basis. So Saturday and Sunday, kids are in school. Let's record motion all day those days, but Monday through Friday, I only want motion after school hours or when people are there, basically. So that's a great point. You have a lot of control on how you can adjust that too. So you don't have to dive deep into that. It's even on a per camera basis too. So you can set certain cameras to that schedule and others to 24/7. So it gets very granular with that for sure.
Definitely. And we'll move right on from this, but like we use school district as an example, but turning it into the private sector, imagine you're a manufacturing facility and you don't operate on a 24/7 schedule, right? You might want 24/7 recording while people are in the plant, that way there's no slip and fall incidents that are getting missed or something like that, right? But then at night, maybe you change that over to record on motion or something. So exactly. Um, so James, with the solution to the motion or VCA recording, like the line crossing people or detection stuff like this, what are some of the cons? What are some of the pros?
Yeah, the only con the pros are first off, it's going to reduce the amount of footage you have to retain dramatically in some cases. So it
Mhm.
obviously depends on how much motion you've got, what kind of facility you are, and everything like that. But for the most part, you could be looking at anywhere between 50% less storage or sometimes even more. Um, the con are is that of it is that you may have a regulatory requirement that says you have to record 24/7, and this may not even be an option for you. So like this is one of those ones where I go like, unless you have that, unless you know that you're going to have motion 24/7 kind of in front of that camera, you should record on motion anyway. It just will make things easier for you to find footage, but also it's going to save you hard drive space and add extra retention for you. So the only con is if you can't use it, it's just unfortunate.
Hmm, definitely, definitely, definitely. So we'll move right into solution three. This is called, and we're calling it quota feature.
Yeah.
Why don't you help us understand a little bit about what exactly we mean here?
So this is goes in a little bit about how NVRs record by default. So when you plug all your cameras in, and you got, let's make it simple, four cameras, right? And you plug it in there, and each one of those from day one are going to start recording, and each of them are going to retain an equal amount of storage space on that hard drive. So think of it like a pizza. You get four big slices on there, right? And they're always going to be the same size slices. And that works for most people. Most people's cameras are they don't mind them having the equal amount of space. But there are some situations where you may have cameras that are more important than other cameras. And for example, you may have a cash register camera that you want to retain, say, 90 days of footage on, but the rest of your cameras, like your, outside cameras and stuff like that, they may not be as important to that cache register camera. So you can set in the NVR, hey, I want to give this amount of space instead of giving four equal slices to this. I use a pizza analogy for this all the time. Instead of giving the four slices equally distributed, I'm going to give two slices to my cash register camera, right? And so that way you're just retaining more footage on that cash register camera than you are your other cameras. And it just allows you to basically prioritize what footage you get on the cameras, which is could save you in some cases because some regulations only require it on certain areas. So that way you don't have to get the 450 15 terabytes we mentioned. Maybe you only need 20 for that one, and then that was very much simplify your system.
Mhm. So, James, if I'm understanding that correctly, essentially, if I'm a marijuana facility, right? That's a regulation, that's an industry that has these regulations, these storage requirements, right? And I know from working with many cannabis clients that the production line, specifically anytime the flower is getting touched, there needs to be 24/7 recording. So let's say I've got, my drying area and I've got people coming in there moving that product to a different room, right? In the room where the flower is drying, I need that camera to record 24/7. You're saying I could allot a certain amount of space on the hard drive just for that camera?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that very important camera there, you need more storage than you do the dumpster camera. You got it. You can set that in the system, no problem.
Gotcha. Okay. What are some of the pros and cons of using this quota feature?
So the pros are, you don't need to get an entire system of 90 days, for example. If you only need the 90 days on a certain amount of cameras, so with that, the pros of that is that your system's going to be less complicated and more affordable in that case. You're not going to need nearly as many hard drives as you would if you try to get all 90 days of them, right? Now the cons are that this is going to require some calculation. You're going to have to figure out how much storage is 90 days for that one camera. It's actually not that hard because we do have the calculator. And as we mentioned before, anytime you have questions about this, you can contact us, our support team. They'll calculate it out with you to give you an exact kind of number, be like, hey, here it is. This is what you're probably going to need. And just keep an eye on it to make sure you're actually getting that footage. But that's the only really con I can think of. And again, sometimes it is a situation where every camera needs the 90 days. It's a regulatory requirement. So if that again, this doesn't apply to somebody who does need 90 on every single camera. So
Definitely. And again, I think you mentioned it there, but just want to reiterate, support team is happy to help, get these calculations for you. We can even help you set it up, show you how to set it up, show you how to make tweaks and edits after that. So moving on to the fourth solution that we're going to be talking about. And again, this is we're getting a little bit more granular every kind of step that we go here, but this one we're going to be talking specifically about event recording. So when we say event recording, James, what are we kind of meaning here?
So this is going back to all these people who have regulatory requirements that have to record 24/7. You're in a situation where you would love to use motion recording, but you can't, right? That's generally what ends up being the case. So our system actually has a way to where you can actually utilize motion recording or motion on the camera, I should say, to help set up the recording to where you're not using as much data. And let me explain how that works. So um, when nothing's happening, so again, you're a 12-hour facility and overnight nothing's happening. And you still have to record that 24/7 because it's a regulation, right? You can still set when there's two types of recording on our system. There's normal and event. And what normal is it's nothing's happening on the image. There's no motion being detected. And so in normal recording, what you can do is significantly reduce the video bit rate and quality and frames per second on it. So that way, it's still recording that 24/7, but it's doing it at significantly lower hard drive costs, essentially. And then when something does detect motion, it can bump up. So it detects motion, somebody walks in front of that camera, right? That's now detecting motion, somebody's in front of the camera. It's going to bump up the image settings back to normal. And so that way you still get a very high quality video when something's happening. But when nothing's happening, you can use a significantly lower amount of footage. So this is kind of complicated to explain, but it can be very, very effective for those people who do have 24/7 regulations.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. So can that also be done pretty granular, like by camera?
Yeah, per camera basis, you can set that. By default, they're kind of the same out of the box. So there's most people don't even know that feature actually exists. It's kind of an unheralded one that can
Yeah.
be very important. But you can set that on a per camera basis and everything like that.
Yeah, it's definitely new to me. That's the first time I'm hearing about it. So that's awesome. So events like it can be motion, but also like VCA events like line
Yeah.
cross and things like that, or
Yep. Any of
oh
those
nice.
that are under the event kind of umbrella, which would be your motion, your VCAs, etc. And it would just and it's very much instantaneous too. Like as soon as it detects that motion, it's up like that. It's kind of
Wow.
like, if you're looking at YouTube, for example, and you're watching us and you see like you have those bitrate options on your examples, or it says like your resolution. Like it basically does that, but it does it dynamically based on
Hmm.
what's going on in your image. So you're just basically not wasting your video storage time on nothing happening. So
Wow. That's awesome. That's really, really cool. What would be some of the pros or cons of using this as a solution?
this this is gonna potentially significantly reduce the amount of storage that you need as well. So this could almost have the same effect or very close to the same effect as doing motion recording without actually motion recording, which is pretty cool. It's not going to be quite as dramatic, but it could be, two-thirds of the way there in terms of it. Now, the downside is the fact that this is sort of a complicated thing, right? You have to sort of calculate out how much motion am I actually gonna get on this camera, what bit rate am I gonna set to them, etc. So like even explaining it is kind of complicated to some degree, I think. Hopefully I did an okay job, but I think when I brought this up in the past to some clients, it is something that seems a little confusing. So maybe it's just the main downside is it's complicated. You'll have to calculate it out, which again, that's sort of what we're here to do for you. So I don't want to scare anything away from doing this. If you have this, if you need 24/7, but you don't either maybe have the budget or you just want to maximize the amount of storage that you actually get out of that 24/7, bring us a scenario. We'll work with you on it. We'll kind of figure it out. We'll look at your NVR if you've already got it from us, and we'll be able to really tweak that in to make sure we get it right. So, yeah, but that's just the main downside. It's a little complicated to talk about.
Definitely, definitely, yeah. I get that. And so really quickly for the layman's term person, who when you say bit rate, are you referring to like the data that the camera's sending?
Yeah, because like every camera that we have is digitally recording. So bit
Right.
rate just basically tells you how much data that camera is taking up per second of video. So,
Okay,
the higher the resolution, the more frames per second you got, the more it's going to be.
I gotcha. Okay, right. And so for those of you out here who might be like exploring different solutions on the marketplace, right? You might be into some of the cloud-based options, right? Where they're recording footage to the cloud. Part of recording footage to the cloud is significantly reducing your bit rate of your camera, right? It's reducing the frame rate, reducing the resolution of the camera. That's so it doesn't cost a fortune to actually store it there. In some cases it still does, but also so it can get there in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so in a way, we're doing this when there's nothing happening in the screen, right? All locally on the NVR. And then when something does happen, it's jumping back up to the bit rate, the higher end bit
Good.
rate, right?
Yep. Good high quality video. So,
Yeah,
um,
gotcha.
yeah, and that's actually a great question. I didn't even think about that was cloud because that's usually when people think like, oh, I need a lot of storage, they immediately like, well, the cloud has unlimited storage, and that's
Nice.
100% true. But when I just talked about, 415 terabytes in the cloud is probably going to cost you 10 grand a month or something like that, depending on the provider and everything like that. But you're looking at to store 365 days for actual high quality video is going to your total cost of ownership within 6 months is probably going to be overstripped by the what you would pay for local storage. So, it's not the affordable way out. There's obviously some reasons to do cloud storage, like redundancy outs off of premise and stuff, but definitely never going to be the one that's going to be the cheaper option. That's just it's going to be most people have some price heart attacks when it comes to that for sure.
Absolutely. And it's not just around the like actual components or even like the monthly fees associated to storing. Like in some cases, you have to upgrade your internet
Yeah.
capacity, like the amount of upload speed you have. And there's just so much more that goes into like cloud storage. So if you're kind of in that boat where you're like, okay, well, price isn't the major concern, um, there's 8 different ways to back up an NVR. And we'll have another video that goes in depth on that. So if it's backing up the footage that you worry, there's ways to do that with traditional systems. Um, but yeah, if we're looking for a cost-effective solution without spending more than you have to, solutions like we've been talking about, event recording certainly sounds like one of them. So that's really awesome. And then
Cool
solution
one.
five, it's kind of like more in line with the one that we just spoke about a little bit, right? But it's
Yeah,
cutting the frames per second.
yeah, these last two we were hesitant to use the word sacrifice in the beginning because really those first ones we just talked about like the motion or the quota or the event recording are more adjustment level things. You're not really sacrificing something in most of those cases, I would say. Now on solution number five, which is cutting your frames per second, you are sacrificing something. To put it really simply, let's just say that those 415 terabytes, our 4K cameras record at 20 frames per second. And frames per second are basically how many pictures are in that second, just as the name implies, a second of video. And the more frames per second, the smoother, the more chances of a good still picture that you have. And so it's nice to keep it, anywhere between 20 to 30 frames per second. Now that being said, in a lot of cases when people are presented this option, they typically have to do some level of sacrifice to the frames per second in a lot of cases. So if you've ever watched the news and you've seen like local convenience store is, held up at gunpoint or whatever, you'll see like the footage is like very like jerky and kind of like a little strange and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, what's going on that? Why do we have cameras that and why do people have social security cameras that look like that? And it's like, well, because storage costs a lot of money and it's a lot of, blah, blah. So a lot of times people do this as one of their first options because go back to that example of the 415 terabytes we talked about, if you cut that frames per second from 20 frames a second, which is the default, nice, smooth movies are 24 frames per second typically to kind of give you a use case, and you cut it down to 15 frames per second, that's now going down to 275 terabytes of storage. So and then if you cut it in half to go from 415 terabytes at 20 frames per second, you go down to 10 frames a second, which is starting to get into like very, very noticeable. But that would only be down to 207 terabytes of storage. So you can see how easy, and it's kind of easy to understand. The less you cut the frames per second, whatever you cut it by, you're going to save in hard drive space. So if you cut it 20%, you're going to save 20% hard drive space. Now, we don't typically recommend this as one of our first options. That's why we kind of mentioned the event recording, because you can kind of do a similar thing without actually sacrificing the video frames per second when something actually matters. So this would be taking like, I'd say the event recording is like grabbing a chisel and really kind of getting into something, and then this is like a hammer. You just cut the frames per second in half, you get double the storage space. And so it's not always ideal, but and then here's you can see the videos we're putting on here that will really kind of explain what frames per second, what it looks like. Um, but it is an option if that's something you're looking into.
Definitely. And to like kind of help give further perspective, a lot of a minute ago we gave a cannabis example. A lot of the cannabis regulations out there, they have that minimum requirement of 15 frames per second. And, just to give like some perspective around some of these agencies, some of these legislations actually have frame per second requirements
Yeah.
for specific reasons, right? But maybe if you're in a space that doesn't have those requirements, right, you can kind of use this maybe a little bit more um, at will to kind of, like James said, knock down that overall storage capacity need, right? But that's why, yeah, the event recording it definitely seems like a really good option to help with that. Um,
Yeah. I would say like I would never recommend this unless we already did the event and we still weren't getting where we needed to be or something like that. And I think the people who do this are mostly just it's just again that the complexity of that event recording option we talked about is kind of there. So like somebody who doesn't necessarily need to want to explain that or maybe doesn't even understand it, just like let's cut the frames per second and we're gonna get that and that's gonna be enough. So I think like we talk about the pros and cons of this. Like the number one pro is that you are going to reduce your amount of storage if you do this right. Cut the frames per second, it cuts the bit rate. You're going to save by whatever you cut it at, and so that's not insignificant. But the cons are you get less pictures per second. It's going to be more of a jerky looking video. You may get less, especially for fast moving things outside. So like you got fast cars over there. You definitely don't want to cut the frames per second there if you're trying to get details on the car. So not the most ideal one. This is definitely one you're making a sacrifice.
no, it makes a lot of sense too. Um, and then that kind of, does segue us to our last solution, the sixth solution here that we're going to be talking about, which is cutting the resolution or kind of overall video quality. And so why don't we run through that, James? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so when you're building out, if you're building a net new system and you know that you need to hit 90 days, you need to hit 180 days, 360, you need a lot of storage, right? Sometimes you really have to be a little bit more particular about the video resolution you're going to be having these cameras at. And what I mean by that is that in our example, we did all 4K cameras, right? That might be something where the first thing I go is like, how many of those cameras can we actually get to be 1080p cameras, or even set the cameras to 1080p when they record? And the reason for that is the higher the resolution of your video, the more it's going to store on your hard drive. So, for example, a 1080p camera is 2 megapixels or 2 million pixels, and we're getting technical here, but you can imagine that that takes a decent amount of storage to hold. But then 4K cameras are 8 million pixels or 8 megapixels. So, it's basically four times, and not quite that because of frames per second and stuff like that, but it's basically like anywhere between a third to a fourth amount of you're going to be using for every one 4K camera, you could record three 1080p cameras or four 1080p cameras, depending on the settings. So, we might use that as a way to look into your system a little bit with a little bit more, again, of a chisel and look and say like, hey, like these cameras are only looking at about 20 feet away. We only need 1080p there anyway. So let's put 1080p cameras there. And then you can kind of do that a little bit more, less on a let's get all 4K cameras and run with it. The so that would be definitely part of it. Although again, the reality is some people want 4K, they need 4K in all these situations. So not always the most ideal thing to run into. This is why it's the last solution we're kind of presenting.
Yeah, and I would say too that like that's exactly what the SCW team is here for, right? Both our support team and our sales team, our consultant team, we are here to help design the system that's going to meet your needs, right? And so we work with some production facilities, and they prefer 4K cameras to monitor some of the machinery, so it's the highest quality, most real-time footage on the live display off the back of the NVR. But they're not recording in 4K. They're recording in 1080p to help reduce some of that, you know, total recording capacity. Um, and so like you can totally mix and match and kind of it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's not, right?
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
all or
Like,
nothing.
yeah, I think that's a great point. That's like, and so many of this thing is going into like have an expert on your side. Like, I mean, this is fairly complicated stuff.
Mhm.
Being able to boil this down into like a video we have, even though this is a pretty long video and everything like that is, I think we'll have some people go like, I have no idea what they're talking about. We do have an article, we have more stuff here. And most importantly, if you want to talk to somebody, you really want to go through like, hey, I heard they talk about this event recording. What is, can you really explain that to me again and fully get reach out to us and and if you got, especially if you got, even if you got a current system, we'll definitely can work through, really understand which ones are important, etc. But especially if you got a net new system and you're trying to build out a solution, this is going to be part of your solution if you have these regulatory requirements, or again, you just need it. We'll work with you to make sure we're not there just to give you the most expensive solution. We're there just to make sure you get the right solution. And 4K is not 4K recording, as you mentioned, is not always necessarily the necessary solution. So we have options in within our system that can record, at the substream if you wanted to, or even lower if you needed to. So it's like so many options are on the table for us to really, again, more of a chisel, less of a hammer when you're talking about this kind of storage stuff for the most part.
Definitely. And that, just kind of piling on top of that, I think that's why it's so important to, be as transparent as you can be. If you have certain requirements or you're unsure, talk to an expert, share as much as you can with them, and ask questions if you don't, feel like you walked away understanding things. Um, we're here to make sure it makes sense. So, James, we kind of covered some of the pros of using cutting resolution and video quality, but like, what would you say is the biggest con? Like, why would we not want to do that?
Yeah, the con is that you're going to reduce your when you reduce your resolution of video, that's going to reduce your effective range on how far you can see something. So how far you can see somebody's face. If you cut it from 1080p or from 4K to 1080p, that could reduce it as well. You're reducing the bit rate by, let's say, four times, right? But you're potentially reducing the effective range of that camera by four times as well. So, you wouldn't want to do that in an area where you need that quality. That's why it's kind of the last the big con of it. The pro is that you are going to reduce your bit rate again. It's going to decrease the amount of hard drives you need and potentially decrease your overall system complexity. So,
Hmm, definitely.
but yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is also the beauty of some of the commercial grade products that we offer, right? A lot of, if not all of our cameras you can manually adjust the settings and reduce some of the stuff, right? Or tweak it and put it back to its fullest resolution, right? So um, there's some things to consider, definitely. So those are the six solutions, right? We talked about first more storage, like let's spec the hardware to get the amount of storage that we really need. We talked about using motion or VCA recording. We covered what quota feature is on our MVRs and how we could use that. Then we talked about event recording, putting a star on that one. That's super cool. Learned something new today. We talked about cutting the frames per second. That's a little bit more of a hammer than it is a chisel. And then we talked finally about cutting resolution and video quality. Um, Anything else that you would, add or that you wanted to finish on, James?
No, I think I think we hammered it a lot. Is give us a call, reach out to us, leave a comment on the YouTube. Like we'll help you there too. I mean, let us know because this is complicated. It is something you want more of a chisel on. We can build out systems that have years and years and years of footage if you need it. So just let us know.
That's right. Absolutely. That's what we're here for. Check out the links to a lot of articles in the description below. Drop a comment below if you have any questions. Like James said, we'll get back to you. Or if you want a video about something specific, drop a comment there and let us know too. Other than that, we'll have some resources to reach out to us at here. And make sure to tune in next time. But for now, appreciate you tuning in. Thanks so much. James, appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Love
Yeah,
unpacking storage.
yeah, fun
Absolutely.
topic. It's a hot topic, and I'm excited to. Hopefully, you guys got some value out of it. But we'll
Right.
see you at the next one for
Until
sure.
until next time, enjoy yourselves. Thanks so much for tuning in, and bye bye for now.